Alright, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Hello and welcome to these videos. These videos are going to be talking about the book Code Complete. We're going to be trying to summarize the book in the form of videos, in the form of concise and brief, detailed videos at the same time. The chapter that we'll be discussing right now is chapter 15, using conditionals. Okay, here are the topics that we're going to be discussing in these videos, in this video. First, we're going to be talking about conditionals, what are conditions, and what the type of conditions that we're going to be talking about in this video. We're also going to kind of demonstrate the kind of tips and tricks that might enhance your readability, the readability of your code, if you're using if statement or if you're using the case statement. Also, we're going to be making some kind of revision or a checklist after the end of the video, just to make sure that you understood what the whole topic was about, and you actually get those tips and tricks. And after everything, we are going to give you a small exercise just to kind of exercise your if statement muscle, just to make sure that you actually got it right and you can use it perfectly. So we're going to start talking about conditionals. What are conditionals? Well, you are an experienced programmer, and of course you know what conditionals are, but just for the record, conditionals are the kind of statements that actually control the execution of other statements. So if you limit, for example, the age or a grade or whatever, if you say that if the grade is greater than a certain amount, then do this or else do that. Now that's a control statement. That's a conditional, okay? Because you actually control the execution of a certain portion of code based on a certain condition. That's what they call conditionals. Okay. Now we're going to be talking about tips with using the if statement. Okay. First of all, as you see, the first tip says that put the normal case after the if rather than after the else. What does that mean? Well, when you actually write a condition, there is always a more normal code, or the option or the condition that is most likely to occur other than the other one. So that condition, the condition that is most likely to occur, you better put it in the if statement rather than the else statement. To explain it in a better way, we just show you some code right here. We have I'm gonna give you a minute to you can actually look at this code and try to figure out what it does. Alright, start now. Well, a minute is too much actually. But you get my point. It's not very well written, it's not very well concise, and you kind of struggle just to look through it to kind of understand what it's all about. Alright, but I can give you the same exact code written in a much better way. Here's the same code. Well, as you can see, it's very obvious that you actually make some kind of a first check done by the method apply first check, and if it succeeds you go to a second check, and if it succeeds you go to a third check, and if the final one succeeds you then admit the recruit or whatever. And each and every one of them is accompanied with an else clause. If the final check fails, then you kind of give it an appropriate error type based on which kind of check failed. What made it more concise and more readable than the other one is because the normal case, or the happy path as they call it, the most predicted case or the most predicted path is laid on first. Okay, this is the expected path. This is the expected series of stuff that is supposed to happen. But if you look at the other one, the other is not organized well, because you have sometimes it's with success and then sometimes with failure, and it's kind of like merged together. The happy path or the more expected path and the less expected path are merged together in such a it's kind of becoming kind of a dilemma, so it's not really very good to read. So the point that we're trying to make, and the tip here, is that whenever you're writing a conditional, there is always a case that is most expected to happen. You expected that this is the most prominent case, and of course you have to handle what if this case doesn't happen. So you put the most prominent case, the normal case, into the if body, and put the other cases, like exceptional cases, into the else body. It makes it easier to read. Okay, so this is the first tip, and I hope it's well understood. Okay, the second tip here is about, it says follow the if clause with a meaningful statement. Okay, what does that mean? Well, sometimes you see this kind of code. I'm just going to type something right here. Well, let's say that you have some kind of condition, but you don't know what you're going to do with it. But you're interested if this condition actually doesn't apply. So you'd be writing something like this. If something, and you're not interested in what this thing has. You just put like a semicolon, just an empty clause. Else, now this is what you're interested in. This is the case that you are actually interested in, and here you put code stuff. Well, this is very naive, and when you look at it, it looks actually kind of silly, because you have like a line of code if you write it in one line, or 3 lines of code if you write it like this. It is totally pointless. I mean, why do you need that? So the point here is, actually, even if it looks kind of stupid, a lot of people does it, because it just seems kind of normal. If else, if else, if else. But if you have nothing to put in the if, just put it empty. This is pointless. You can just replace it in a much neater and a better way. You just write if not something. That means if the condition is not met. This is just equivalent to the else part here, just without the empty if body, right? And you just write your code. So this is the second tip, that you have to understand that you have to follow the if clause with a meaningful statement. All right? Okay. The third tip here is consider the else clause. Okay, what does that mean? It might seem tedious to you sometimes, but you should definitely put an else after an if. Whatever kind of if, you have to put an else after it. Well, sometimes you might feel like, I don't need an if. I mean, if the condition occurs, just do this. I don't need to add an else. But it kind of a better programming style if you just put an else. Why? Because if somebody else reads your code and you don't put an else, he might assume that you actually forgot to handle the the exceptional case or the else case. You might actually forgot it or whatever. So if you write it, even if you just put it empty else without any kind of code, you make them understand that you actually handled the else clause. And here in this particular situation, there is no else code to be written. And if you feel like maybe it's better even just not to just put it an empty else clause without just, maybe you have to write a comment sometimes to discuss, to just you write that this particular case we do not really need an else clause to it. So here the tip is like that. You better add an else clause to any kind of if clause that you have in there, just to make the code readable, to make sure that whoever reads it, then he will understand that you actually handled the else clause, and there is no else clause in here. It's not just about you just forgot about it. And it's kind of a symmetry, because for each if you have an else. Okay, the fourth thing that we're going to be talking about, the fourth tip, is that you have to test all passes. Okay, sometimes you might feel tempted to just test the if clause, because if you followed actually the best practice that we talk about, and you put your mostly expected path or the mostly expected condition in the if clause, and you put the code in it, then you most likely, this is the code that is going to be executed, right? You don't need the else clause. Mostly it's not going to be executed. So you might feel tempted that you just need to kind of test the happy path or the most expected path in your unit test or your integration test or whatever. But you have to test all the options, all the passes, all the branches. You have to test it to make sure that everything works well under all situations. Okay, the fifth tip here is talks about you have to simplify your if conditions. What we mean by that is that you need to actually kind of encapsulate a really long if. Sometimes you see a very, very, very long condition, okay, like if this or that and this and that, and it's so long that you cannot actually follow, you cannot actually understand. If you read this code, you cannot understand what is this condition, what is in a more kind of abstract or logical term, what does it do, okay, because it's very long. So you have to encapsulate it in some kind of a method, that returns Boolean, just does all the work. And this method has a very reasonable, it might have a very good name, just to kind of tells the story of the condition. And we actually have this kind of an example here. Look at this code. First of all, this is a completely bogus code. I don't know, it's not the actual kind of logic that business schools do. But here we're talking about having your GRE, having your GMAT grades, having your motivational letter score, and years of experience, and somehow they have to make a decision based on those information. Look at this kind of condition. Look at this condition. I mean, it's kind of, it's long. It's if somebody wrote this and I read it in a code, I will not understand it. And it's kind of, you know, branchy. And this is just small. Sometimes it's like 5-6 times bigger than this. So it's not good. But look, the same code, just written a little bit better. Instead of writing all that, it kind of tells a story here. If full admission conditions met, then a decision is admitted. If conditional admission conditions met or restricted admission conditions met, so this is a method that it does all the dirty work. It makes all the comparisons and the conditions and the whatever. And what I'm interested in the condition is that I have this body solid method just returns true or false based on the information without the details being in the condition itself, which is very unreadable. So this is kind of important. Alright, so these are basically the tips that we're going to be talking about, or we actually talked about, and we hope that you actually take care of in when you the next time you write your if statement. Okay, next we're going to be talking about case statement. Okay. The first issue that, of course, we assume that you know how to write case or switch statement and you know when to use it. So we're not going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about tips to kind of enhance the readability. Here, just one small thing. The whole point of this chapter, and actually the whole point of the book, is to make you write a better code. Better not in terms of, sometimes in terms of performance, but mostly in terms of readability. It makes anybody, whoever reads your code, understand it, you know, quickly. And it's actually an indication that your code is well written, it's professionally written, it's actually beautiful. So the first issue, the first tip that we're going to be talking about with the case statement is the issue of ordering the cases. The thing is, if you have like a case statement with 3 or 4 cases, it's not really a big deal if you order them. It's not much very important. But if you have a case statement, and actually I, for one, have a program that we have 65 case statements, I think. So in this kind of situation, you actually, the ordering of the cases is very important, because let's say that you're looking for a particular case. Well, instead of just scrolling down and up, and wasting time and feeling, you know, tedious about it, if your cases were well ordered, you can just access it very quickly. So how to order it, how to make the ordering well? First of all, if the cases, your cases, are kind of equally important, well, it's kind of understatement, but let's say that your cases are equally important. That means none of them is just more important than the others, or it's more accessed, or just assume that they're all the same. In this case, you can just order them alphabetically. And if it's the case, if the parameter itself, the parameter that the casing or the switching is done on is a string or a character, you can just make it alphabetically. Or if it's a number, you can just order it by number. So it's not going to be a problem. But if let's say that your cases represent a situation where there is a normal situation or normal case, or what we call the more expected path or the happy path, okay, and then the others are merely a set of exceptions or exceptional cases or extreme cases. This situation, it makes more sense that you put the normal case, the case that is going to happen a lot, or the case that is going to, you just put it there in the beginning, right? The first case, and then you put the exceptional cases after it. Or sometimes one of the cases is accessed more frequently. It is usually called by others or whatever. And in this case, it makes more sense that the most frequently accessed case to be put on top. Okay? So just to wrap up, if the cases are equally important, then it doesn't make much sense to you can just alphabetically organize or order them. If one of them represents the more normal case or the accepted path or expected path, then you can put it on top. Or if one of them is more accessed than the others, you can also just put it on top. Okay. The second thing that we're going to be talking about is that you need to keep the actions of each case simple. Well, it makes sense, because you should always strive to make the case body slim. You shouldn't make it fat, because just imagine the case when you have like a switch statement with 60 cases, and each of them has a very complicated 60-70 line code. I mean, if with the switch statement like that, you can actually lose focus. You cannot drill through it just to understand the whole story, because you get, you dive into each one of them, and it's so long you cannot zoom out. You cannot actually see the whole, the full picture. So the point is, you have to minimize the code in each case statement. And if the code, by the nature of the problem, if the code in the case statement is very complicated, you can just get it out and put it in a method and just call it within the case statement. It's very neat and concise and more professional, actually. Alright, the third tip we're going to be talking about is the actual use of default. Well, sometimes when you have dealt with all the other cases and you have only one case left, you might feel tempted to just throw it in the default case, and this is actually a mistake, and here we're going to be discussing it. Okay, we have this simple problem. Let's say that we have a subscriber number, a cell phone subscriber number, and then we try to kind of deduce the subscriber category from the number. So we actually use this method, and then we get the category. Category is either class A, class B, class C, or class D. And then based on the class of the subscriber, we actually call this method submit subscriber with the subscriber number and the particular class as parameters. Okay, let's say that when we first wrote this code, there was only 4 cases, or only 4 categories possible for each subscriber. It's either class A, class B, class C, or class D. So as you see, we dealt with the first 3 cases as for example, if it's class A, put it in a case, class B, put it in a case, class C, and then we put the one extra more case, the last case, in the default. And it made sense because it works. For each subscriber we have only 4 cases, and now all 4 cases are covered. Okay, let's say that they introduce another class, class E, and we have to add it here. So you see that possibly what you're gonna need to take this from here, and you need to add it as a subscriber category, right? And you have to add the method. And then you might need to add the third one, the fifth one. I'm going to say that you're going to add the new class E, in the default case. So you see, in order to add a new case, you actually had to change what's in default and then add it as a unique or as a new case. And this is wrong, because what makes more sense is when I need to add a new case, I just add it. I just add a new case statement right here, and that's it. I don't need to actually modify the default. The default case is supposed to be dedicated for what they call legitimate cases. It's mostly used when you have an exception, or something's wrong, or a condition that is not covered by any of the case statements, and that actually is wrong. For example, in this particular case, it would be perfectly legal, it would be perfectly reasonable if the subscriber category is not identified, if it's not one of the legitimate classes. I just need to notify the person, or make some kind of an error message. It would be something like that, error, I don't know, deducting, or error in creating or finding out the subscriber category. It makes more sense like that, because this is what should be put in the default case. Okay, you don't need, you shouldn't just add the one extra case that you just did, one extra case that you didn't want to put in a separate so okay, so we're just gonna go through all of this one more time just to make sure everything is clear. For the if, first we have to say, we said that first normal cases after the if, not the else. The second thing, that if clause should always be followed by a meaningful statement. Okay. The third thing is that else after any if, even if it's empty, just put it right there. Maybe you need to add some kind of comment just to make sure why you leave it empty. Okay, you need to test both the if and the else statement, not just okay, if this is most likely, this is what it's going to be executed, so you shouldn't forget about anything. And the last thing is that you don't need to have a very complicated logical expression in the if condition, because it's not well written and it cannot be read easily. You have to just replace it in a method. With the case, we have a checklist as well. First, you should order your cases either alphabetically or by frequency, if one is more active than the others, or it's just the normal path. Also, you need to keep actions of each case simple. If the case body itself, based on the logic, is very complicated, just put it in a method and just call it within the case body. And the third thing is that the default should be mainly used for catching error cases. You don't put actual logical situations in the default body. Right, so here's what we were talking about, and we have an exercise here. The exercise is a simple code excerpt from a real program that is being developed in Banan. You can find it in the same folder with the other with the video and the presentation. And the thing is, if you can just summarize those ifs, as you see here, is a very, very complicated and long logical condition with magic numbers, and it's very hard to actually follow to understand what is this all about. So the problem would be, I need you to simplify these ifs, okay, the conditions, in order to make it more friendly, and do what you have to do. See you next time. Thank you for tuning in, and it's me, Ayman Idris from Banan IT.